Hello and welcome again to Dogs or Torches. In this episode, we are joined again with Dr. Gavin Kerr to discuss Aquinas' doctrine of substantial form and hylomorphism. We'll be discussing Aquinas' understanding of matter as pure form, the relationship between substantial form and esse, or the principle of the act of existence, and the principle of individuation in material composite substances. Gavin, thank you so much for joining with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on again. It's a pleasure to be here. Had a great week. The weather's been nice here in Ireland. It's been up to about between 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. So we're really getting spoiled. This will be our summer. This will be, the 1 week of warm weather. So that's what we're doing at the minute. Unfortunately, though, for me, it's always, when we get that first, sort of week of warm weather in the spring, I just come down with the bad allergies, with the hay fever and stuff. So I've been the last few days, I was just took a bad fever and real chills and sickness, and I was convinced I had COVID. I didn't, but I've still just been recuperating the last couple of days and being miserable about that, as you do. So trying to get all the sympathy from everybody just because I'm not feeling the best. But sure, playing on anyway.
For me right now, the weather, it's snowing where I am, and so which is weird because it was the first day of spring a few days ago, and now I would expect that it would be nice and warm, but yeah, we got hit with a snowstorm from where I am. But
right,
so far looks like it's chilling down again, so that'll be nice.
Okay, go.
But yeah, I figured we could maybe start with Thomas Aquinas and his understanding of the matter-form composite. And before we sort of get into that, I just wanted to ask, what exactly is hylomorphism, the doctrine of substantial form? What is that?
Yeah. So generally, hylomorphism is a position that goes back to Aristotle, and it emerges in two ways. One way that it emerges is generally in metaphysics, as a reaction to Plato's theory of forms. So Aristotle is well known. He reacts negatively to Plato's theory of forms. He doesn't react to a theory of form. So he doesn't, react critically to the idea that reality is formed in some way and that form accounts for the unity of things. But he reacts to Plato's theory, and is well known, Plato has this theory of form as some separate immaterial substance in which things participate. So that's one way in which the theory of forms comes about. Aristotle's theory of forms, matter-form composition comes about. But another much more fascinating way is through Aristotle's philosophy of nature, or what was called physics. Because Aristotle, he's approaching this whole issue of change and the principles of change and how things can change. And one of the principles that the pre-Socratic philosophers were committed to is that nothing comes from nothing, the ex nihilo principle. So if you've got some sort of, quality that a thing has, let's say, musical, the thing has gone from being non-musical to being musical. But the whole problem that the ancient philosophers were trying to figure out in accounting for change is how the non-musical can go from being non-musical to being musical. It seems that the musicality there is coming from nothing and just taking the place of the non-musical. Well, Aristotle, in analysing this, argued that a lot of the pre-Socratic philosophers were analysing change at too much of a superficial level, that they were trying to see how one contrary, such as non-musical, could change into its own contrary, such as musical. And Aristotle says that's the wrong way to go about it, because we can't just think of the contraries of one contrary changing into another, the non-musical to the musical. There is an underlying thing or subject which undergoes the change, and it is the subject which is non-musical, and in the process of change, the subject goes from being non-musical to being musical. So Aristotle holds it's essential that we posit this underlying subject which subsists throughout a process of change. Now, when it comes to a change like, going from non-musical to musical, that underlying subject is the substance. And that's an accidental change. It's not essential to, let's say, a man that he is either, the non-musical or the musical, because that's just an accident that the man has. That's accidental change. And one of the things that Aristotle holds that we need to place here in that analysis of change is that not only do you have a subject, okay, which is undergoing the change, you also have a form of change. You've got that into which the subject is transforming. So if it's a man, a substance, he's going from being non-musical and he's transforming to being musical. So there's the form of the change, which is the goal, the end of the change. And Aristotle holds that privation is also a principle of change, because prior to changing, the man has to go from being non-musical, i.e. not in a state where he has that musical ability, to being musical. So prior to receiving the new form and the new outcome of the change, there's some lack of that form. He's deprived of that form in some sort of way. And these are then the three principles of change. You have a subject, you have a form into which the subject changes, and you have the deprivation of that form. And that's accidental change. But when it comes to substantial change, the change from one substance into another, so not the change from a man from being non-musical into music, the change from a man into something else, some other substance. Let's say the man dies and his flesh, feeds, the ground, which feeds the birds and so forth. Then you have a complete change of substance. So Aristotle held, in that case, what the underlying subject of change is matter, or prime matter, as we'll come to discuss. And that prime matter is informed, it has some form, which form produces the substance that we have. And when substantial change occurs, it loses that form and takes on another form. So for the human being then, the form that it has, making it the kind of thing that it is the rational soul. It configures the prime matter in such a way that you've got a human substance here. But when it loses that rational soul, it takes on some other form. Let's say, the human is eaten by a tiger. Well, so the prime matter there, goes to inform the tigers. It goes to be informed by the tiger's, animal soul. And so you have this underlying subject, which is the prime matter, and then you have the form which informs it. The form which informs the prime matter, making it the kind of substance that it is, human, tiger, tree, or whatever, is what's called a substantial form, because that's the form which gives actuality to the prime matter, bringing about the sort of substance that we have before us. So that's, in a nutshell, that's Aristotelian hylomorphism. As I say, it's a reaction to Plato's theory of forms, but it's also a reaction to pre-Socratic views about change.
And as I understand it, when Aquinas sort of adopts this idea of hylomorphism from Aristotle, he makes some sort of changes with it, like he connects it closely with his theory of participation. And as I also understand it, he also sort of considers that essence is identical to both matter and form, whereas in Aristotle, that's not the case. I mean, would you say, what are the differences between Aristotle's idea of hylomorphism and Aquinas' adoption of the doctrine?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there with one of them, that for Aristotle, arguably, his view is that the essence of the thing is signified by its form, whereas for Aquinas, the essence of the thing is signified by its definition. So whatever the definition of, a natural thing is, it's going to involve its matter in some sort of way. And this is a position that Aquinas articulates as early as the De Ente et Essentia. And one of the reasons that Aquinas has for holding this, that the essence is signified by the definition of the thing, which involves both its matter, is that, as you say, that essence participates in an active existence. So whatever is subject to the active existence in the thing is going to be some sort of feature component of the essence. And since both of the thing's matter and the thing's form are subject to the active existence, the matter surely exists, as does the form. They exist in composite unity with each other. Then both of those are included within the essence of the thing. But because Aristotle didn't distinguish between essence and existence, form then is the principle of actuality, and matter is just a principle of potency which stands to be actualized. And so form is what's doing all the heavy lifting there when it comes to the essence of the thing. That's what's that's what tells us what the thing is. But by contrast, for Thomas, it's the active existence which is doing the heavy lifting. So anything subject to that then is going to be included in the essence of the thing.
And then with respect to connecting his the theory of hylomorphism with his theory of participation, which we discussed, would Aristotle hold to that the form itself is common and it's only individuated by by being received into matter. Is that an Aristotelian idea?
Yeah, I mean, that's Aristotle. That matter is the principle of individuation, and Thomas takes that up as well. And he goes into some depth on that. But yeah, the idea in Aristotle there is that what form in itself is universal. Okay, so you take the form of man, right? So that's what makes an individual substance a man as opposed to a horse. But that form, it's predicable of many, so it's universal. It doesn't exist in itself. It always exists in matter. And the distinct parcels of matter that we have distinguish the distinct substances all sharing in the same form. So matter is the principle of individuation there for Aristotle, and Thomas follows Aristotle on that, but he adds a little bit to that with regard to the determinate dimensions required for individuation.
One of Aquinas's earliest treatises on physics, on change and generation, is the De Principiis Naturae. What would you say are Aquinas's main insights regarding matter and form here? I know that you and Pat Flynn are kind of going into depth about that treatise and going chapter by chapter, but what would you say are the main takeaways from that treatise?
Well, what Aquinas does there in the De Principiis is he outlines that Aristotelian model of change, which I discussed at the beginning there. You find that model of change in Aristotle's physics, and so Aquinas presents it in this small little treatise, which is about 5 or 6 chapters, depending on which edition you're using. And so, first of all, outlines the different principles of change, so subject, form, and privation. But then he goes on to point out that, 2 of those are per se, or essential principles of change. That's the subject and the form. And the privation is just an accidental principle of change, because the privation isn't any sort of actual principle. It's just a lack of something. And those 2 essential principles of change, Aquinas points out, correlate to 2 of the 4 Aristotelian causes. That's the formal cause and the material cause. The material cause has least causal scope amongst the causes, and it's informed by the form, and so that's the formal cause. That has greater causal scope. But then Aquinas goes on to point out that formal cause doesn't have any actuality. It doesn't act unless acted upon by some efficient cause. It's the efficient cause which introduces form to matter, and the efficient cause itself doesn't act unless it's motivated to do so by some final cause. So the final cause is the cause of the causality of the efficient cause, which is the cause of the causality of the formal cause, which is the cause of the material cause. So you have this causal hierarchy in Aquinas' thought there, with the final cause being the cause of causes. And then as you go down, efficient, formal, material, you've got less and less causal scope. But every one of those causes is required for the complete explanation of a changeable thing. Now, would you like me to speak a wee bit more about Aquinas' views on matter as the principle of individuation, or would you like to move on to something else?
I figured we could maybe discuss maybe individuation at the very end. As I understand it, with respect to prime matter is understood to be purely potential for Aquinas. Like, it's not a substance; it doesn't have any quiddity. It only exists insofar it receives. It's informed by something.
Yeah. So prime matter is pure potency. For Aquinas, it has no actuality unless it receives its actuality from some sort of form, which gives what Thomas says, determinate dimensions to the prime matter. So the prime matter receives from the substantial form its dimensionality, and in having its dimensionality, it in turn individuates the form to being in the world under those dimensions.
And how exactly is prime matter known for Aquinas? As I understand it, he sort of takes an analogy of proportionality, that we know what prime matter is in the same way that we might know what bronze is when we see statues. That we just don't see like plain bronze lying around. We see particular things like informed into bronze. And Aquinas sort of takes that in a similar vein, in a similar sense. We can describe how we know matter.
Yeah. So prime matter never exists by itself as prime. It always exists as formed in some sort of way. That prime matter is real is undoubtedly true, because you need some underlying subject through any process of substantial change. If you didn't have an underlying subject, you would have just a break in existence. You would have nothingness and then all of a sudden something new will come into existence. So you need that prime matter to continue through the process of change. As one substantial form leaves, another substantial form enters into the prime matter. But because it only ever exists as formed, otherwise it would just be pure potency, the only way that we can know it is, as you point out, by performing that kind of mental operation of thinking of the matter, let's say, of the statue in relation to the form of the statue. So the matter stands as potency to the form of the statue. You don't kind of, know bronze in itself. You know it as the bronze of the statue. So let's now imagine just the bronze minus the form of the statue. Well, now you just have a chunk of bronze, but that still is under determinate dimensions because, it's like a chunk of bronze this size, so it has some substantial form. So what you have then is you have some kind of metal which is informed in some way, i.e. qua bronze, but not qua iron or qua steel or anything else. And so now just imagine that metal minus that form. So it doesn't have the form of metal now. It has, some other, form. So you got the matter of the metal, and if you got the form making it metal, and just keep stripping away all forms, and you come at the notion of prime matter. Prime matter is just matter without any form, and you kind of have to perform a mental abstraction to get to thinking about it.
So when we think about matter, it's important not to think about like subatomic particles or elements or anything like that. I mean,
yeah,
we can sort of describe the bronze as being a material cause of the statue, but really the bronze itself is composed of matter and form.
Yeah, and in fact, the statue doesn't have a substantial form or matter. Rather, the statue is an artifact made up of different substances. Well, made up of the one substance here, which is bronze. So it only has an artificial form. It's only naturally occurring things which have matter and form.
Right. That substances are only applicable to things in nature. Like human artifacts aren't really substances. So I guess you'd say that the statue technically, the substance is bronze, and we might colloquially call it like the form of Hermes, but really that's only just like an accident of like determinations or positions, right? Right.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. So there's a real interesting wee thought experiment which is brought up in this respect. So I mean, you take a bed which is made out of wood, right? And let's say it has the form of bed. Okay, so you've got the wood and put together in the form of a bed. Okay, now that's clearly an artifact. Now, if that were an actual substance, okay, substances beget their like. And so the idea here is that if the bed were a substance, it were a bed substance, if you were to bury the wood and the wood were to start sprouting, it wouldn't start sprouting beds. It would just start sprouting more like oak wood or something like that. Right. An oak tree would grow out of it. You wouldn't start growing beds out of the ground. The point being is that artifacts don't beget their like. Rather, if you took this substance out of which the artifact was made, that would beget. It's like, the steel, the scrap metal, of old bits of furniture and stuff, and melt it down. You've just got more scrap metal. The wood, just remains wood or whatever. So it's those things which have substantial forms composed with matter, not the artifacts that they go to compose.
And then another question that I have with respect to prime matter is, can prime matter, independent of being informed by a substantial form, can it be sort of kept in existence in any sort of way, or even by the power of God? As I understand, this is kind of a debate during Aquinas' time, and as I understand it, Aquinas sort of denies that prime matter, since its pure potencies, can sort of exist in and of itself, independent of having form.
So, I mean, to understand this question, we need to understand that in Aquinas' view, a thing has its active existence through its form. Okay, so the form configures the prime matter such that it is apt to receive existence. All right. So, I mean, the substantial form and the prime matter are composed together and is thus apt to receive an active existence. Now, this doesn't happen temporally. I mean, what we have all at once is, the substance existing, and then we break it down into its different metaphysical hierarchies. And the active existence is the act of an essence, and the essence is the composite union of the prime matter and the substantial form. So it's through the substantial form that the prime matter comes to be able to participate in existence. Because when you think about it, for prime matter, to participate in existence, it has to be the prime matter of something which exists. Um, Otherwise, it's not the prime matter of anything, and so it just wouldn't participate in existence. So in order for prime matter to be, it has to receive some sort of form. So could God keep prime matter in existence without any form? Well, that would be a contradiction for Aquinas, because prime matter can only exist through form. So prime matter then can't be preserved in existence by God without form. Well, for God to do that, he would have to give it some form so that the thing would be apt to participate in existence.
I see then. Well, then, okay, if I can follow up then, how exactly does esse, or the act of being, relate to the matter form composite? Does the substantial form sort of impart esse to the prime matter? Well, maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. I'm just wanting to ask what's the relationship with hylomorphism and the metaphysics of esse?
Yeah, so the fundamental distinction in Aquinas' thought is the distinction between essence and existence, or esse, the act of existence. So everything in the substance has its existence through, the substance's act of existence. It's esse. And when you think about its substantial principles, its matter and its form, the matter and the form have their actuality through the act of existence. Now, when Thomas says that form gives esse to the thing, forma dat esse re, he's not saying that, God imparts esse to the form, and then the form imparts esse, to prime matter, like a top-down approach.
Right.
Rather, what he's saying is that the actuality of prime matter is the actuality of form, and the actuality of form is the actuality of esse. So, form disposes prime matter to being formed, to being the matter of a substance, and that substance then has an active existence, which active existence grants actuality to both the matter and the form of the substance.
Okay, so it's almost like a hierarchy of sort of an imparting actuality, so to speak, where the actuality of the matter is derived from the substantial form, and the substantial form and matter composite, its existence is only derived from the principle of esse, the actus discendi, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you've got a hierarchy of composite unions in the substance. The most fundamental is essence and existence. Then within the essence, it's matter and form producing the substance. And then within the substance, it's substance and accident. So you've got this hierarchy from greater to less scope within the thing.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so if I can turn maybe to a slightly different subject and debate. As I understand it, in the medieval era, there were theories about sort of how many substantial forms there were in a single subject, specifically like human subjects, whether there's a sort of a form of corporeality, and then a rational form that was superadded onto it. And this was sort of understood to be the plurality of forms thesis. And this is taken up by later Franciscan and early Franciscan thinkers, and this is a very popular idea. But as I understand it, Aquinas is very famous for rejecting the plurality of substantial form thesis, and he takes for a unicity approach. So what are his motivations for doing this?
Well, there's a couple. We can go at it from different angles, but the first one is that for Thomas, as soon as prime matter receives form gives prime matter its dimensionality. And in having such dimensionality, the matter delimits the form to a particular kind of instantiation. So now you have a form individuated in matter. And once you have a form individuated in matter, you've got a substance. So as soon as that prime matter receives any form, you have a substance. And any form which comes after that then is an accidental form. So the idea then that you can have a corporeal form and then added to that a substantial form conflicts with that position. But not only that, the idea that you can have a corporeal form which precedes the substantial form carries with it the implicit assumption that matter in itself is not corporeal. In other words, that you need a form to distinguish between a kind of matter which is corporeal and a kind of matter which is incorporeal. So you can imagine then some kind of matter which doesn't have a corporeal form, but which only has a substantial form, and that would be the matter of an immaterial substance. It would have non-corporeal matter informed by a substantial form. And that's a position Aquinas rejects. That position is called universal hylomorphism. The idea that matter-form composition extends to every creature, material or immaterial. So the angels just don't have their corporeal form, they have the substantial form informing their incorporeal matter, whereas material creatures have a corporeal form, which makes them bodily, and then a substantial form, which makes them the substances that they are. But Aquinas famously rejects universal hylomorphism, arguing that it's not matter which is the principle of potency, it's essence which stands in potency to the active existence. And it's because of Thomas's commitment to that there is a principle of actuality more fundamental than form, that he rejects universal hylomorphism. So what we're left with then is that you have matter, and once it's informed, it receives determinate dimensions and thereby individuates its form, and so you have a substance before us. Its corporeality is drawn from the determinate dimensions that the substantial form gives to it. You don't need an extra corporeal form to make the matter corporeal.
And as I understand it, another concern that Aquinas has is that since a substantial form makes prime matter to be the type of thing that it is, any sort of additional form, it wouldn't be a substantial form, it would be an accidental form. So even if you grant that there's a corporeal form, the rational soul really wouldn't act as a substantial form, it would act as like an accidental.
Exactly. It would only be an accidental form. Being rational would only be accidental. Any specific difference that any species had then would only be accidental, built in on top of the corporeal form.
Okay, then.
But I would point out that this has its roots in the medieval debates over Christology, over the identity of Christ's body in the tomb. Because one thing that Franciscan view has going for it is that whenever we're thinking of Christ's human nature here. Whenever the rational soul is sundered from its body, it's still a body which is in the tomb. And so, but if it's without its rational soul, then how can it still be a body? Well, the Franciscan view comes in here nicely. Well, it's still a body because it still has that corporeal form. Christ's rational soul is, he descended into hell, and so on Holy Saturday he's in there preaching, to the pre-Christian righteous and freeing them, from hell, the Abraham's bosom. So the Franciscan view kind of gives itself a nice explanation there, whereas on Aquinas' view, if there is no corporeal form and Christ's body has lost its rational soul, how do we, give an account of Christ's body in the tomb? Because it is his body in the tomb. The way Thomas kind of addresses that is that whilst the matter and the form have been divorced from each other, okay, whilst they're no longer composed with each other, Christ's rational soul and Christ's body are still united to the person of the Word. The hypostatic union hasn't been dissolved. The unity of rational soul and body might have been dissolved, but the hypostatic union hasn't been dissolved. So both body and soul still remain united to the person of the Word, even though they don't remain united to each other. So, I mean, this kind of has a knock-on effect on these medieval debates. So, it is heavy-going metaphysics which is driving these discussions, but there's also a view towards, resolving some of these issues in Christology as well.
Right. And as I understand it, the theory of the unicity of substantial form, there's a condemnation that really occurs after Aquinas' death. I don't know if it's the condemnations of 1277 specifically, but I know that there are all these sort of, academic debates in the university about whether or not you could really consistently hold to a unicity of substantial form thesis and still be a Christian.
Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of, there's always these kind of condemnations, but, the condemnations in the 1270s, they were really just a very, how would you put it? They were a mixed bunch of propositions that were condemned. Some were condemned as not being suitable to be taught at a university, but in themselves they were fine, or some of them were condemned for not being exactly kind of, clarified, and others were condemned for being just downright heretical, and they were a mixed bunch, and but yeah, it was just a period in the sort of history of Paris and the teaching of theology at Paris. It wasn't a condemnation of the universal church. I think it was just a condemnation by the local bishop, Etienne Tempier.
Yeah.
So I don't think it has the status of a universal condemnation. John Whipple has done some great work on the condemnation in the 1270s.
Okay. Yeah. That might be an interesting further episode of looking into the condemnations. One thing that I also wanted to touch on is, I know we mentioned it briefly in the beginning, but why does Aquinas think that a thing's essence is its matter and substantial form instead of simply the substantial form? Why does he hold to that position?
Yeah. Well, there's a few reasons. I mean, one of them is that the thing's essence, its quiddity. What it is signified by its definition. And if you want to give the definition of a thing, if it's a natural thing, you're going to have to include its matter. Matter is going to have to enter into that definition, or you've missed something essential to the natural thing. You can't, define a natural thing without adverting to its matter. So matter is going to have to enter into the essence there of a natural thing. But more fundamentally, Aquinas is thinking of the distinction of essence and existence here. If essence is what stands in potency to existence, then whatever participates in existence in the substance has to pertain to the essence of the substance, and that's going to be the matter and the form. The matter and the form are what participate in the act of existence in the substance, and so because the essence comprises those principles of the thing which participate in the act of existence, matter and form then are going to be the principles of the essence of the substance.
I see. So it really seems that a lot of Aquinas' insights regarding substantial form and hylomorphism are informed, as it were, by his metaphysics of the real distinction.
Oh yeah, I mean this is on his mind from the very beginning of his career, from as early as the De Ente et Essentia. I think the De Principiis was written kind of around about the same time as the De Ente, kind of at least that same period in his life. I should know this when it was written because I've been doing it with Pat Flynn. But I think it was written around about the same time. So, he's thinking about, he's basically got his, metaphysics in place from the very beginning of his career.
And also his doctrine of participation also sort of fits nicely with his understanding of hylomorphism. And another question I'd maybe like to ask in that direction is, what does it mean for Aquinas that matter limits the form that it receives? What does it mean to limit a form? I know we talked about it last time with our participation episode, but what exactly, what was Aquinas getting at there?
Yeah, so if you think of a form like humanity, right, the human form, right, no single individual human is humanity. So every human is an instance of humanity. And the way that a single human being is an instance of humanity is because their human form, their substantial form, making them human, is delimited by the matter. So what does that mean? It means that the substantial form gives quantitative dimensions to the matter. It gives it dimensionality. And those dimensions then situate the form of the substance in space and time. In fact, those quantitative dimensions then situate that form as part of the thing which exists in space and time. And so because of my quantitative dimensions, I've existed and subsisted, through a particular period of time and particular regions of space, and no other things with the same form as me, or even of a different form as me, can exist at those same places at the same times. So the very time that I'm sitting here right now in this very place, as the human being I am, with the human form that I have, means that my wife, who's in the next room, can't be in this exact same place at this exact same time, precisely because the quantitative dimensions that her substantial form gives to matter, and which is thereby limited by those quantitative dimensions, means that given those limitations, we can't occupy two places at once. So that's what it means to say that matter limits form.
I see. Then, for Aquinas, then, is the principle of individuation, an objection that's sometimes given is, okay, how can pure potentiality individuate anything? And as I understand it, Aquinas says that, okay, it's matter, it's designated matter, but it's also designated matter with sort of a specific quantitative dimensions, and that's sort of the principle of individuation.
Yeah, it's the designated matter which individuates. Now you get designated matter from the form giving dimensionality to the matter, thereby it can be designated under those quantitative dimensions. And those so the form receives its dimensionality, not the form. The matter, prime matter, receives its dimensionality from the form, okay? But in receiving the dimensionality, the matter is able to be a receptive principle for form, which thereby limits the form to the dimensions that the matter has. So the form plays an active role in giving dimensionality to matter, and the matter plays a passive role in receiving from form and thereby being able to individuate form according to the dimensions that it receives.
But as I also understand it, there's a sort of debate that has been going on in Thomistic studies about whether matter is or designated matter is understood as the principle of individuation, or it's to be understood as the principle of the active existence of esse. And I think that Joseph Owens is the one to really popularize this idea that esse is the principle of individuation. But I don't know too much about that debate.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a debate there is. I think Joseph Owens is just wrong there. I don't know if he has much defenders. I mean, I kind of adverted to his view there, and in my book on creation. I think it was my book on creation where I adverted to Owens's view. Yeah, because I was writing about individuation, and I kind of just somewhere in one of the footnotes I have a memory just writing that I find it odd that Owens would suggest that the act of existence is the principle of individuation. The act of existence is individuated by the essence whose act it is, and that essence is constituted by the composite unity of matter and form. So the thing is already disposed to receive the act of existence, to participate in the act of existence, and as already disposed, it is individuated. So I can't see how the act of existence could be the principle of individuation. I find that just a very odd view for Owens to defend.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be sort of ahistorical to what Aquinas sort of consistently sort of defers to in his metaphysics.
Owens knew Aquinas inside out, and he's one of the greatest Thomaists of the 20th century. So. I read his article on the matter. I thought there was maybe more speculation than how would you say, scholarship. But look, it's Joseph Owens. You got to take the guy seriously, and you got to engage with it. So, but
that makes sense.
I guess on that one.
Right. All right. Well. I think we've discussed pretty much everything I kind of wanted to cover. Do you have any sort of further closing remarks or any suggestions for further reading?
Well, for further reading, the material I found best on this, both from a scholarly point of view and also from a more sort of systematic philosophical point of view, is John Whipple's treatment in the metaphysical thought of Thomas Aquinas. Anybody who's interested in Aquinas' metaphysical thought, I recommend John Whipple, wholeheartedly. That book, published in 2000, is still the leading book on Aquinas' metaphysics. I think it was A.N. Whitehead said that the history of philosophy is footnotes to Plato. I think, the next generation of Thomistic scholarship on Aquinas' metaphysics are just going to be footnotes to, Whipple's work. They're all going to have to start with what Whipple gave us. And in that book, and round about the middle chapters, after he deals with essence, existence, and participation, he goes on to substance and accident. And so much good stuff in there. Whipple, for anybody who's read him, he just trawls through Aquinas' texts, and he traces Aquinas' treatment of a point through all the major texts and through all the different areas. He knows the text inside out. and he's able to give you an overall balanced view of things. And Whipple himself, he's not just a scholar, he's also a metaphysician. So he's able to handle the issues quite well. So I would really recommend beginning with Whipple on that if you want to do some further reading on Aquinas on matter and form. But also read St. Thomas himself. I mean, the wee treatise, De Principiis Naturae, on the principles of nature, it's a great wee treatise to read. It kind of takes you a wee while to get into it, just to see the debates that he's entering into, those debates that Aristotle was dealing with in the philosophy of nature on change. But it is a great text to get into, and as you pointed out, I've been doing a deep dive of it with Pat Flynn. We just finished it, so we were looking kind of, word for word at every chapter. It's great we want to have a look at, and if anything, it gives you an idea of Aristotle's physics. Now for the Thomists amongst us, we'll see Aquinas' little additions, but it gives you a good idea of Aristotle's physics, and the physics, like anything by Aristotle, is not an easy book to read. So Aquinas is giving you a little treatise here of Aristotelian philosophy of nature. And then for the Thomists amongst us, we can detect all the wee sort of bits and pieces that Thomas has peppered it with his Thomism, for which he'll never take credit. But it'll still give you kind of that insight into Aristotle. So I recommend going and having a look at that.
All right, yeah, that seems to make a lot of sense. Yeah, I very much like Whipple too. The only difficulty I have with Whipple is that he always consistently goes back to the Leonine Summa edition, and he's like, okay, I'm fresh out of Leonine Summas, so this is kind of a little unhelpful. But otherwise,
and it's hard to chase up his references because he just refers to the Leonine volume and page numbers, and he doesn't often refer to the title, and so you kind of have to go looking through the text to see what title he's referring to.
Right. And is there a specific translation of De Principiis? I mean, I guess we could always just learn our Latin like we should, but is there a particular translation that you'd prefer or that you'd recommend?
McInerney gave us a translation. There's a nice wee volume by Joseph Bobic, Aquinas on matter, form, and the elements, and it's a translation of the De Principiis and the De Mixtione Elementorum on the mixture of the elements. I find it very readable, but what I found with Bobic's translations is that whilst they're readable, when you go back to the Latin, they somewhat take things off in a different tangent than what is actually maybe to be found there in the Latin. Bobic can just be a wee bit difficult at times, but yes, there's the McInerney translated the De Ente as well. McInerney produced a little volume of Aquinas, I think it was on selected writings or selected philosophical writings. He translated that was the first writings of Aquinas that I ever owned or possessed, was the McInerney translation. I think it was by Penguin, and I think the De Principiis was in that. The De Ente was definitely in that. So yeah, that is a nice wee translation. I just read the Latin. I'd really recommend your listeners to go off and learn Latin and read Aquinas in Latin. You'll not regret it.
I've got one more semester left, and I just need to muscle through it. But yeah, I'll work on my Latin myself. Well, Gavin, thank you so much for joining with us today.
Not at all. I apologize that my voice is a bit raspy and stuff. I'm starting to lose my voice now with the sort of the kind of allergies and the sickiness. But hopefully it came across. It didn't sound too gravelly, too Johnny Cash-like.
No, not at all. You sounded great.